Filipinos that the next administration is serious to improve the food-producing sector. But is the incoming president up to the job? We discuss in this episode of The Chiefs. Welcome to The Chiefs. Ako po si Roby Alampay. Kasama po natin from Manila. She's joining us online. Ami Pamintuan of the Philippine Star. And dito po sa Mandaluyong, kasama natin si Lingao of One News. Maya-maya sasamahan din po tayo ni Luchi Cruz-Valdes of News 5. Chiefs, happy Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday.
What's the scoop? Anong headline bukas, Ami?
Well, konting celebration muna, hindi naman headline. Diba, after 65 years, 6 decades, nanalo yung volleybells ng National University.
Ang NU Lady Bulldogs. Congratulations. Kanina nga
Yes.
pinag-uusapan namin. Gretchen, of course, a volleyball player herself, was breaking down how great a feat that was. Oh, by the
Yes.
way, Luchi Cruz-Valdes is here joining us.
Ano siya?
LCV, welcome. Ay, naka-freeze yata yung ano niya. In the meantime, Ed,
Hindi nagbayad ng ano. Hindi nagbayad ng internet.
ikaw, Ed, ano pang na-monitor natin?
Well, yun nga, there was an earlier interview with an official from the DA to the effect na, well, there were some concerns that some appointments in the past to the Agriculture Department were more political than they were based on expertise. Inihabo lang niya na pananaw.
Well, among other things na, masalimuot na nga ang sitwasyon sa pagkain at saka sa agrikultura, sasama mo pa ng usapan sa politika. Pero anyway, sige, tama-tama yan because we will be talking to somebody with a lot of insights, a lot of experience also, and I think also a lot of knowledge to impart to the incoming government. Let's call in our first guest, fresh from an announcement from the President-Elect. Good evening, Agriculture Secretary William Dar. Welcome back to The Chiefs.
Good evening.
Magandang gabi. Magandang gabi po, Ruby, Ami, Luchi, and Ed. Good evening po.
Good evening po.
Yeah, let me start po, before we get to any conversations you've had with the President, I want to ask, this decision to be the acting secretary first, certainly as has been reported, it signals really how seriously the incoming government is going to take agriculture. But at the same time, knowing how serious the crisis that's looming is, and people are feeling it in terms of prices. On the one hand, he needs to give people reason to hang on, if not to hope, but at the same time, he has to manage expectations. In 100 days, what can he actually promise that's realistic and that he can deliver on?
Okay, let me start by, again, welcoming the decision of President-Elect President Marcos Jr. To personally oversee and be at the helm of the Department of Agriculture. This is a strategic move on his part, showing that, yes, this is now the time for the sector, agriculture sector, to be given the topmost priority of government and having that political will, and hopefully that significant budget also will be given supporting Philippine agriculture. So this is a good signal. And of course, there are big challenges starting day one of his presidency and as Secretary of Agriculture. First 100 days, he has to have marching orders. Number one, the action plan to mitigate the impacts of Ukraine war has to be out and to be known by everyone so that various stakeholders are in the know that these are the major plans, major programs and projects that would enhance our response and survival during this looming food crisis. Well, the other part would be to also set in place the reform for the Department of Agriculture in many ways in terms of various agencies that need to be strengthened, agencies that need to be integrated, and many other things like having to really put in place the house in order. Now, the third part is to put in place as well the long-term direction for Philippine agriculture to grow and to be unlocked. So those are the things we must suggest for the incoming president and the incoming Secretary of Agriculture to at least pursue in the next 100 days.
But without a doubt po, these are all very important. You mentioned an action plan, how to keep a lid, if that's even possible, on fuel prices, reform, and then, as you said, long-term plans. But again, let me rephrase it po. In the first 100 days, people are looking for any tangible feeling that, okay, medyo, kahit papano, we're getting some good news here. What are some tangible targets for one?
Ruby, let me go to specifics. So one of them is this enhancing the implementation of the action plan. That's the biggest to be put in place in the first 100 days. Now, a specific of this would be, for example, we need fertilizer subsidies to support the growing of major food commodities that we need during this survival stage. There are already signs of the outcomes of the lower use of fertilizers. This first semester of the year, there is now a contraction of 6% of the rice production because farmers have now reduced the use of fertilizers because of the tripling of the prices of fertilizers. And that will happen also to other commodity industries. So what must we do in rice, for example? But before that, let me again mention the point that we have made strides in rice production for the last 2 years. Record harvest, 96.9 million metric tons in last year's harvest. And that leads us to 92% of our requirement in rice. Now, the promise of having to have, for example, cheaper rice, hopefully soon. Now, I would like to believe that there is, within 100 days, an executive order can be issued by the President mandating the National Food Authority to increase buffer stock capacity from the present level that they have of only good for 7 days because of their limited budget of 7 billion. Now, what is our proposal? For NFA to be given additional budget, for example, this year, they need, for example, 4 billion pesos to prop up their procurement. So 4 billion on top of the 7 billion, they will now 11 billion to procure palay. That will bring them up to the level of about 9-day buffer stock. Now, while building up the capacity, if there is a stimulus bill this year, for example, that 4 billion must be charged there, plus the capital expenditure necessary to improve the various facilities of NFA. So you enhance their capacity to go beyond, say now 9% this year, or 9-day, buffer stock, to say 15 days by mid-year of next year, and by end of next year, 30-day buffer stock to be managed by NFA. And in so doing, so they will have more exposure now in procurement of palay that can maintain good prices of palay. At the same time, whatever they bring out to the market in terms of price, they can now sell it at 20 pesos to the 4-piece. So little by little, you are able to give priority to focus groups or targeted groups like the 4-piece that can buy 20 peso per kilo palay from the NFA rice. But of course, every year as you increase the budget to NFA, you will be subsidizing that. So this year you will need additionally 4 billion. By next year you will need 14.6 billion pesos. In 2023, in 2024 you need 33.5 billion. And 2025, 36.5 billion. In 2026, 37 billion. 2027, 37.5 billion. This is to capacitate NFA over time to have a buffer stock of 30 days. And the NFA rice goes out to the market after 3 months in storage. So they roll that over and sell that at 20 pesos to the poorer segments of society.
Secretary, so lilinawin lang namin, you're saying now na 20 pesos rice per kilo is possible? Kasi dati yung best case scenario nyo, 27.50 lang eh.
No, let me clarify that, Ami. The 2750, this is the program that we designed. A new program, we have Masagana 150, and that's for inbred rice production. Masagana 200 for hybrid rice production. So that's 10 tons and 7.5 tons for inbred rice, 10 tons for hybrid rice. Over a period of time, we can go to the level of 2750 as the price for now the public market overall.
Ang assessment ni incoming Presidente, yung problema daw sa agriculture sector is severe. At saka kailangan daw ayusin yung value chain. Do you agree with this assessment?
Oh yes. Very severe problems. Kasi napabayaan ng sektor ng agrikultura. How do we characterize agriculture today after all these long years of neglect? Stunted growth, low productivity. So, kailangan ma-infuse ng prioritization ng significant budget.
Sir, if I got you right, sir, yung 20 pesos per kilo na rice will only be made available to the 4Ps beneficiaries. Yung 27
That's
pesos...
as we move along, kasi yung capacity ng NFA ay it has to be improving over years kasi
Yes, sir.
hindi nila, they are not ready now to go to 30 days even this year. So
Yes, sir.
I would like to say accelerate by the end of 2023 next year, they will now have the capacity of 30-day buffer stocking. And when they have the 30-day buffer stocking, this will be equivalent to a projected palay procurement of 3 million metric tons in 2024. So that's about 1.9 million metric tons of rice.
Yes, sir.
And
Pero, sir,
this 1.9 million metric tons of rice at first target the 4Ps. After meeting the requirements of 4Ps, then you go to the other poorer sector of the society.
yes, sir. But even then, sir, even with the limiting of the targets, the potential beneficiaries, you're already looking at anywhere from 20 plus to 37 billion per year in
Yes.
subsidies.
You will have to subsidize, and that will now be incurred as a loss every year by NFA also.
Yes, sir. Is that sustainable? Do you think? Is that sustainable? Is there any way that we can support that kind of a subsidy in the long term?
Well, it's better to have that subsidized through buffer stocking so that we have more confidence that even when there are also calamities, that we are able to survive. We have enough supply, not like 7 days today.
Yes, sir.
Yung
Sir?
buffer nyo, how much of that will be imported? Kasi yun ang inaalala ng mga local farmers natin.
No, let me point out, Ami, all this procurement by NFA must be from local sources.
Yes, sir. Sir, but even then, sir, even if you implement proper buffer stocking beyond the 30 days, would that be enough already to drive down the price of NFA rice to 20 pesos per kilo? I'm just wondering. I don't know. I don't have the numbers, of course.
As I've said, Ed, there is a new program that will be simultaneously be implemented
The fertilizer.
towards that level of 2750. So eventually, you continue to sustain the 30-day buffer stocking of NFA, and of course, you have to pay for that, while making sure that the new programs are going to be properly implemented with all the components necessary as interventions. Then we increase the productivity, we lower the cost of production.
Okay. Sir, we've been talking about, ganito kasalimuot yung, rice pa lang yung pinag-uusapan natin. In the meantime, tumataas din ang presyo
Ang dami pong mga important commodity industries, and rice is the most political, so that's why we are giving attention to that now.
In the meantime, tumataas din po ang presyo ng asukal. Livestock is where people are going to get their protein as well. What are the recommendations for these other sectors?
There you are. We have now to diversify our protein sources, not only from one, but alam natin ng Pilipino ay na-hook na yan sa, for example, pork. Much of our protein requirement comes from pork, then from vegetables, and of course fish as well, and vegetable legumes,
Ang hinihingi, babalikan ko lang sir yung rice kasi ang hinihingi ngayon ng mga farmers kay President-Elect i-review daw yung rice tarification. Gusto nila itigil na. What do you think of that proposal?
Well, we have to look at various consequences of that. Ngayon, this is a reform made after how many years? I think more than 2 decades na they've been waiting for that. What can be done? But we have to do an informed decision here. And we are at the stage of reviewing the performance of the rice tarification law. That's mandated by law. By the end of the 3rd year of implementation of a rice tarification law, a very objective study has to be done to look at what adjustments, if need be, can be done. I will only say, based on this study, that we can really implement kung ano po yung recommendations po. Pero offhand, pag sinabi i-repeal na walang basihan, then that's not a good thing to do.
Sir, si Ami binalik sa rice. Ako, ibabalik ko na naman sa ulam. In particular, fisheries. No? Nasa agriculture din po to. I spoke with some fishermen recently, and they were saying, on the one hand, sinasabi sa amin, increase our efficiencies, meron daw research and development, and so on. But at the end of the day, all our catch, whether that's aquaculture or from the open seas, by the time we get to the market, we're met in the market by fish from China. Essentially. How do they compete in their own country is their question.
Now, again, may pagkukulang pa ang gobyerno in terms of the needed infrastructure requirements for the fishing industry. We need more landing ports. We need more bangkas for the commercial, for the municipal fishers to really go out to about 15 kilometers from shore. We need more fishing gears. We need to enhance their capacities. Even also for commercial fishers, we need to do a repleting of their vessels and the like. Ang dami pong pangangailangan po dito. At alam naman ninyo na itong last year, like this year again, mayroon pa rin a deficiency ng ating fish supply based on our production dito sa Pilipinas. And that's why one of the action points dito sa Ukraine war is to distribute more fingerlings sa ating mga aquaculture, mariculture parks, mga riverines, para mas marami tayong supply ng isda.
Sec, magkakaroon kayo ng transition sa department. Has the President-Elect talked to you or consulted you?
So far, I sent a message through the emissary, and positive naman yung response ng emissary na kasi doon sa aking message, sabi ko, with now the pronouncement of President-Elect taking over agriculture, please convey the message that we are ready to brief him at his convenient time, and rest assured that we are here to see to it that he will succeed in his endeavor. And very positive naman.
Mas nauna yata yung briefing ng mga senador, and the senators, sabi nila, they have submitted the report on the investigation of smuggling, agricultural smuggling. Ano po ba yung latest take na dun sa those reports of smuggling within the agriculture sector?
Well, we have said this time and again. We want to eliminate smuggling. We want to be sure that we can play an active role if given that responsibility. We don't have the police power in smuggling. Our main responsibility of the department is only to enforce food safety. So, yung smuggling, parang ang number one dito po ay Bureau of Customs. Wala kaming police power to bring them to the courts. Now, let's strengthen anti-smuggling efforts of government. I am all for any effort to really bring to court any smuggler with all the evidences against them. So, ganun po ang take po natin yan. Wala tayong kinakatakutan kung may ebidensya, dalhin sila sa korte.
Ang sinisita po kasi ng mga senator ay yun daw sobra-sobra daw import quotas coming from your department.
Now, yung mga importation, basta dumaan sa legal, ay there must be a legal cover. Otherwise, there are smuggling efforts that are undervalued, misdeclared. Yun ang mga smuggling. Opo. At saka yung hindi dumadaan sa proseso, yung talagang illicit coming in of the goods.
Okay. Secretary Dar, maraming salamat po.
Thank you,
Opo,
Secretary.
Maraming salamat
sir.
po at mabuhay po kayong lahat.
At outgoing Agriculture Secretary William Dar. Please stay with us. The Chiefs will be right back.
Welcome back to the Chiefs here on One News, and now joining us is political scientist Cleve Arguelles. Professor Arguelles, thank you for joining us, and welcome to the Chiefs.
Good evening, Professor.
Good evening, Prof.
Good evening, Prof. Prof, sorry, just to check, sir. Is it Clive or Cleve? I just want to make sure we're getting it right.
You pronounce it correctly. It's Cleve.
Okay, sir. Well, sir, thank you, sir. Thank you for that. Sir, a while ago we were talking to outgoing Agriculture Secretary William Dar, and sabi niya, well, the incoming president's decision to also take over the agriculture portfolio is a good signal. My question to you is this: yes, perhaps it's a good signal, but is it a practical signal as well? Because one of the Agriculture Undersecretaries pointed out earlier na may steep learning curve yan, and if the president has other matters on his plate, is this a right thing to do? Is this the practical thing to do?
Yeah. I actually think that that's a very good and a right question to ask about this declaration coming from the president-elect that he wants to handle the agriculture portfolio directly. Because on the one hand, he's saying that the reason why he's doing this, as we know, is because he's convinced that there is a crisis in the sector and there are urgent problems that must be dealt with. And from his perspective, it makes sense that the president will deal with it directly. But on the other hand, it also feels that when something is really urgent, when something must really be tackled, right? And if it's really the priority of the national government, the usual practice is to designate a special task force, a special person, someone close to the president, someone with proven capacity, someone trusted, just like in the current Rodrigo Duterte administration. Because what would happen, given the demands of being the president and running and overseeing all of the entire bureaucracy, is that what's going to likely to happen is President-Elect Marcos Jr. will be forced to run the agriculture department with just his left hand, because his other hand is busy doing all the presidential work, right? And that would just really be not compatible to what he says is the reason why he would want to take on the department.
Yeah, apart from how difficult it's going to be, juggling all of these, not just problems, but really crises. You have a economic crisis, you have a health crisis, food crisis, and so on. I'm curious, politically, I mean, how much of a risk is it to basically be the guy in charge with no buffer, no? The guy in charge of controlling food prices. Diba? We always say, yung malapit sa bituka, diyan talaga aaray yung mga tao, and that's where the biggest expectation is as well. This is without a doubt, a very courageous move on the part of the incoming president to say, na, that's me, there's nobody else to blame but me. But if the prices don't come under control, and a lot of the factors are external to the country, I mean, how big a price is he risking here politically?
Yeah, I think it's actually the reason. I mean, we hear from the incoming administration that the reason why the president-elect wants to run this is because it's an urgent issue. But it could also be this reason why they cannot attract someone to handle the agriculture department, because nobody wants to be the fall guy. I mean, politically, it would be really hard to deliver on the grand promises of the incoming administration. For example, on the lowering the price of a kilo of rice to as low as 20 pesos, right? This is a really tall order. And if you will be handling this department, all of the political risks will be on you if you won't deliver. But if you succeed, the Marcos administration, the president-elect would benefit, right? So I actually think that because the president-elect decided to handle this on his own, that this is also a big political risk. But we've also seen in the current administration that the relationship with the voters, the relationship with the Filipino citizen isn't really exactly straightforward when it comes to making policy-related promises. I think if you have a good enough story to tell to the Filipino people why your promises didn't happen, then you can get away with it.
Well, that's the other speculation, no, that he took on the DA portfolio precisely to make sure nga that he can deliver on his most noteworthy campaign promise, now dialed down to an aspiration. At siguro kaya din siya nahihirapan na kumuha ng, well, as you mentioned, kaya nahihirapan kumuha ng Agriculture Secretary dahil nga even the current Secretary, sinabi na niya hanggang 2750 lang yan, although kasasabi lang niya kanina na pwede pala yung 20 pero sa 4 fees lang. No? Ano tingin niya doon sa ganong observation? He really wants to deliver on the 20 per kilo rice.
Yeah, because if you think about it, mapapaisip ka talaga is, the president-elect enjoyed historic landslide votes He has a really huge political coalition. So you can imagine that maraming nakapila for the different departments seeking his appointment, right? And it's just really perplexing that it appears that at least from my perspective, no one is really raising his hand to run the agriculture department. And when it comes to this promise na they are starting to backpedal na then saying now it's an aspiration rather than really a policy initiative of the incoming administration. Even, for example, if you look at NFA, yung government-controlled na rice supply, even if they can lower down the price to as much as 20 pesos, it's just a really small portion of the entire supply of rice in the country. So it would really take a lot of work, and most of it is really structural. Even if they start the work on June 30, July 1, on the day 1 of the administration, lowering the price of a kilo of rice is really a structural challenge, no? You have to not only just on the agricultural part, yung agricultural productivity natin, the inputs of the and the, I meant the outputs in the agricultural sector, but also think about the cost of transportation. Are we ready, for example, in terms of the demands of transportation to really bring down the cost of yung mga agricultural products natin? So this will take years, and if, again, as I've said, even if they start on July 1, it probably will take another administration before Filipinos will actually see a reduction in the price of the rice.
Pero sir, let me ask Ami's question in a different way. Yung Pinoy ba talaga, as a general rule, siya ba talaga yung naniningil? I asked that kasi, for example, the incumbent president made several promises with regard to corruption, the drug problem. He gave us a limited number of months when he campaigned. And, well, obviously, maraming hindi natupad, pero he leaves office with a very, very high popularity rating.
Yes, I think that's also my observation. And if you ask me, the standard expectation in terms of democratic accountability towards elected politicians is that if they don't perform well, if they don't perform on their promises, then they will be voted out in the next election. But we are very much familiar with the state of the politics in the country. We've had we have currently President Rodrigo Duterte has made promises, and many of those promises weren't really fulfilled. And if you think about it, also at the local level, for example, there are political families who's been in power for decades or even longer than decades. So this kind of standard expectation of democratic accountability doesn't really work in the country. What happens really is that during election day, these policy promises, these policy initiatives don't really matter. Something else matters, electoral mobilization, the voting machines, for example. And this is a big problem. This is why political scientists like me, we have always advocated changes in the electoral system, because we can't really expect good governance if your electoral system is broken. As long as the politicians in power, as long as government officials elected don't fear that they may not be re-elected because of poor performance, then there's really no incentive, right, to deliver on the policy promises that they've made to the voters.
Yes, sir. But sir, there's also a new element, I suppose, here in that this president was elected on the basis of a lot of disenchantment and disappointment over the last 36 years na hindi na-deliver ang mga napangako ng demokrasya. So we're coming off from that na I suppose but here, please correct me if I'm wrong, he comes into office with a huge wave of expectations, but on the other hand din naman, he also comes into office with a lot of concerns from the other side of the fence na anak ni Marcos, press freedom and all that. So meron kang push and pull . I wonder
This
how that
is-
factors into everything. It's a bit, really, it's a big
It's a-
question mark for me.
That's I would agree with you, and I think this is actually one of the things that I'm trying to understand, because as we've seen that the president-elect enjoys a huge political mandate, but I'm not sure if you could really see that historic mandate to change, to really work on the disenchantment of the Filipino voters on the state of governance in the country. Whether that's really reflected in the choices, for example, in the cabinet appointments, for example. I think what the selections that have been made so far, the message that I get from that is that it's business as usual,
Yeah, it's
because there
continuity.
were continuity, right?
Continuity.
But I think if you ask an average voter, the man, the woman on the street right now, why they voted for the president-elect and even the vice president-elect, because they want change. But you don't see that in appointments being made. I haven't seen any something creative, something really new that may make me think that change is, as the current administration popularized, that change is probably coming. I don't see that.
I'll
Well,
just
speaking
tell.
of the
Go ahead, Ami.
speaking of the appointments, no? You're from the academe. What do you think of the designation of the vice president-elect as the education secretary? You heard her in her inaugural speech. Ano yung nakikita niyo?
Well, I think she will really have a very difficult time, no? Because we are currently in the midst of an education crisis, right? Aside from the enduring problem in the backlogs in facilities in public schools, no? Tsaka infrastructure, we also have a learning problem. Our students are really performing poorly in math, in science, in even just in reading comprehension compared to our neighbors, and we are among the world's worst performing in this international test. So that's really this will be the challenge to the vice president-elect as she assumes the post of education secretary. And the Department of Education is also really a huge bureaucracy, and she will be leapfrogging us from the position of Davao City Mayor. She's been vice mayor as well. So this is really a different ball game. She will be running a really huge department with 100% visible presence in all parts of the Philippines, right? So I think that this will be a test of her leadership. This is the kind of job that will really demand full attention on her part. And I'm not sure if coming into this coalition with the president-elect and having win this election as well, whether that's also her expectation that she will be playing that really huge role in the administration.
Professor, kanina we were talking about an economic crisis, a food crisis, health crisis. Muntik ko na makalimutan until you mentioned it. Education crisis pa rin. But let's try to look for, is there any bright spot? Is there any low-hanging fruit, any opportunities for easy wins that this incoming government can take in the first 100 days?
I think the appointments made to the economic team, no, yung mga economic managers that have been announced, have been celebrated in some sectors, because I think if you are looking for reassurance, if you are coming from the perspective that you want stability and continuity of the economic plans that's been put into place in the past 6 years, then I think you'll be happy to see these names that have been announced by the president-elect, right? So I think that's an easy win if for some parts of those in the business, in the corporate world, and investors, if they want a continuity of what they have experienced in the past 6 years, then I think the answer is that it's a positive yes. That's going to happen in the next 6 years. But although you were looking for something positive, but as I've said, if I will be coming from the perspective of those voters who really thought that this administration will work day one on economic recovery of the people, walang may iwan, it's babangon muli. For example, the entire country will be lifted out of poverty and misery as a result of the pandemic and pre-pandemic problems. I have yet to see any indication that we're moving towards that direction.
What about the calls for unity? It's coming from their camp, no? You think that's happening now? Are you seeing it in the appointments, in the pronouncements?
So there are the names that they come from past administrations, right? So mga recycled pigs, seasoned bureaucrats, seasoned technocrats, and I think they could say that that's a reflection of their attempt to unify the country by bringing these different political forces together, or political names together, right? But I'm still also quite worried, for example, in terms of the other elements of governance. For example, disinformation in the country, who gets access to the president-elect and the vice president-elect, which media outfits will be accredited as part of the Malacanang media, for example, because I think we are also seeing indications that how they've run the campaign, and a party that it's a very divisive campaign, that's also going to likely continue, that there will be this pro-administration bloggers, for example, spreading disinformation online and targeting, harassing opposition or activists, for example, or those who are raising dissent, right? We have also yet to hear from the President-elect about the National Task Force on the LCAC, right? Which have been for the past years really on top of red tagging community activists, for example. And if these things won't really be, if there won't be any changes to these other aspects of governance as well, then I'm not sure if that's really communicating or sending the message that they're ready to work with the country and really unify the country.
Yeah, but in fairness, with regards to those things that you mentioned that we're waiting for, they're precisely things that we are still waiting for. Diba? Hindi pa nangyayari.
Yes.
On the other hand, still to the point of unity, and to your point about the economic team, for example, as being taken as positive by a lot of groups, isn't those designations, in fact, also, in a way, arguably a win for unity, given that a lot of these cabinet appointments are people who have served across various administrations, including the Aquino administrations? Isn't that in itself also something that they can claim is signaling that this is something that we can claim on behalf of the unity platform that we promised?
I think that this very early stage of the incoming administration, I would concede that that's really, I think, a good expression of unity, that they are willing and that they're able to work with seasoned bureaucrats, seasoned technocrats, even if they have served presidents which are not really allies to the president-elect, right? I think that's a good expression of unity. But on the other hand, we also see other messages coming from this administration. For example, the fact that the vice president-elect chose to do her inaugural ahead and on her own, departed from really tradition. And I know that in 2016 they also did a separate inauguration, but that's understandable because they come from two different political forces. Now that they come from the same ticket, and it's been the first one since 2004, right? I think there was an expectation that they will return to that practice of doing the inauguration together. So I think it's a bit confusing for people like me who's doing the observing, for example, that you have this attempt to communicate a message of unity on the part of, for example, the selection in the economic team, but there are also other signals, there are also other messages saying on something else.
Well, when it comes to the NTF-LCAC, aren't you reassured by the appointment of Clarita Carlos, for example, and Menardo Guevara, both of whom have said that they don't believe in red tagging?
Right. I'm actually really happy to hear that from the incoming National Security Advisor, and I actually also celebrate the fact that we will have a civilian as a National Security Advisor. So hopefully that will be a change in the tone as well as the direction of how we're dealing with our national security challenges in the country. But we also know that the national security, if you will, sector inside the government is a huge sector, and there are different players in there. So we have yet to see how influential the presumptive secretary Carlos, in terms of really changing the direction of the entire national security bureaucracy. And a big part of that will really depend on the president-elect, right? The marching order at the end of the day will come from him. And I think I haven't heard anything from him about this issue. And in fact, I also want to say that, going back, that many of the things that we are expecting, we are talking about in terms of what policy direction, what the cabinet members would do. We're still quite in the dark, right? Because they haven't really participated in the debates during the election. They haven't really talked much about their plans, right? So we're still trying to really get the picture here.
Pero Prof, also, the National Security Advisor is just that, a presidential advisor. She does not really have her own line agency. And when we talk to incoming Defense Secretary Faustino, yes, he says that he does not like red tagging, but he said it in the context of the current administration, when they say that they're not really red tagging to begin with. So, there are actually two ways of looking at the positioning of these people coming in.
And and this may be I have yet to really make my final argument about this, but this may be a new kind of like strategy, for example, of leadership of the incoming administration, that they really send different kinds of messages, really send different kinds of signals, right, as to sort of like strategic ambiguity. Could be, this could be shaping up to be their strategy, right, in terms of public relations, in terms of talking to the media as well.
Or simply good cop, bad cop.
Could be.
One of the things that people have, and really that's all it is so far, diba? But one of the things that people have speculated on is the fate of Senator Leila de Lima under this incoming administration. What do you see happening, and how do you think it should be framed by the incoming administration, either as an albatross around their neck, given that human rights will always be one of the elephants in the room, where every time you mention Marcos, at the same time as an opportunity to really signal, and as we said earlier, to maybe take an easy win and even surprise the opposition and stymie the opposition with such a development such as releasing Leila de Lima. How do you think it will be taken, and what are the pros and cons for the incoming administration?
I think you're right. If they're looking for an easy win, and if they really want to communicate that they're working for unity of the country and they're serious about the business of unity, releasing from jail Senator Leila de Lima will be a really big step towards that direction. I think that will be welcomed by many in the human rights community, including members of the academy who are advocates of human rights as well, for example. But we also know politically that this coalition, this incoming administration, is a product of an arranged marriage between different forces, including the Marcos family, but also the Duterte family, right? And the one with really an axe to grind when it comes to Senator de Lima is the President Duterte. So this is something that must be resolved within the coalition, within this coalition between Marcos and Duterte, whether they're really, whether this is something that they could compromise or whether they could really let this go, right? As a sort of like a political step on the part of the incoming administration. But I doubt that this would something that they would something that they would consider. because there are also still standing, there is still a standing case in the International Criminal Court, for example, and the Senator De Lima's role as a former Commission Human Rights Chair, for example, that could also still be revived as part of the investigation, right? Although the case is definitely just during the presidency of Rodrigo Duterte, but I'm not sure if they would welcome, for example, to see a more active human rights advocate on the part of Senator De Lima. That might not be strategic on their end as well.
Habol ko lang on human rights. Are you seeing a gentler campaign against illegal drugs?
So I think we can still say actually, kasi although the President-elect did say that he thinks that it must be continued, the Vice President-elect as well said they run on, even though they run on change messaging, this is really a continuity tandem as well. So I think that we could expect that they will continue the war on drugs. But I also think that a big part of the war on drugs, and we know this, is also something that's a function of the leadership style and the personality of President Rodrigo Duterte. And I think they're very two different personalities, this incoming and outgoing president, right? So I think on that note, we could be optimistic that we will probably see a shift in the practice in terms of the drug war. But I think the other important question is whether we'll be able to see prosecution and we'll be able to see accountability on the part of those who are involved in the drug war. And on that note, I think that's very unlikely.
Speaking of personality and leadership style, one thing that we have already seen is obviously the body language and the rhetoric of this incoming president is night and day, right? With President Rodrigo Duterte, he doesn't curse. He's not crude. I think clearly he aspires to have a statesman's tone and body language. The press conferences are much easier to cover, much shorter on time.
So much earlier.
Yeah, di ba? No, but I mean, among other things, mababaw ba yun? I mean, speaking for media, we can say that there's a real difference there, and it's something that people are pointing out. It should lower the temperature at least every time civil society, the media, and for that matter, even academics like you deal with the president or the official family. Pero mababaw ba yun for us to focus on, well, at least ganyan siya magsalita? Or are we waiting for actions to speak louder than words? Or do we, in fact, take something out just by the fact that, well, at least the rhetoric is not as heated as before?
Right. I think it's not trivial to talk about, for example, presidential rhetoric and the personality and leadership style of the president, even the incoming president, because he is the chief executive. In the Philippines, in our constitution, he is not only the head of government, but also the head of state, right? And that means that he has ceremonial functions. That also means that we look up to the president to speak on behalf of the nation. The tone at the top really sets the tone at the entire bureaucracy as well, right? So I think it's these kinds of changes are welcome. For one, personally, because I also do my research. For example, when I do my research, I had to read the transcripts, and sometimes if there are no transcripts available, I have to ask my research assistants to do it. And definitely, as a present admin, it's really difficult work to transcribe presidential press conference, presidential addresses. So now it will be easier. But as I've said, it's not easier. It's not trivial because a big part of how, for example, mga mature democracies really function is that there is this expectation of regularity, presumption of standards, no, that different actors in your society, businessmen man, academics man, civil society man, the population at large, they can expect, no, what roles, there's a regularity in the sort of like the routine nested of the different actors, right? And because of that, people can make plans, people can make medium-term, long-term plans, right? Hindi ka laging guessing game, right? So I think it's a good, it will be welcomed by many na we no longer need whisperers, no, someone to decode what the president said, no, with the incoming chief executive.
Okay. Well, Professor Arguelles, maraming salamat po. We look forward to seeing you again when we're talking about actions and not just so far the behavior and the words. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for having me. I had a really nice discussion with you all. Salamat po.
Maraming salamat po. Political scientist Cleve Arguelles. And that will be all for this edition of The Chiefs. We hope what was discussed here will keep the conversation going. Before we go, a reminder to our viewers, mask on, wash hands, and stay safe, Philippines. I'm Roby Alampay.
I'm Ami Pamintuan of the Philippine Star.
I'm Ed Lingao, and we are One News.